My name is Bohdan, and I am an alcoholic. And I'm glad to be here. I'm grateful to be sober. It's good to be at a gathering of sober folks and people who work and care about recovery. Maybe you know that prayer that begins a lot of recovery meetings. Maybe we can do it together. That's serenity prayer. God, grant me the serenity to accept the things I cannot change, courage to change the things I can, and the wisdom to know the difference. Amen. Optimist looks at the glass and says, it's half full. Pessimist looks at the glass and says, it's half empty. Alcoholic looks at the glass and says, you gonna drink that? And that's the way it was for me. It's pretty simple. I was gonna drink whether the day was good, whether the day was bad. I reached that point, I crossed the line in my drinking where I was going to put a chemical in my body no matter what happened. Maybe you can relate to that, but for me, that's the truth. I grew up, as Ed said, in northern Minnesota. My dad was a pastor in Bemidji, Minnesota for 30 years. I grew up there, born and raised. My mom has her master's in counseling. I am third out of 4 kids, so if you know anything about birth order, you know everything you need to know about me. My brother is the golden boy. My older sister was the rebel growing up. I was the lost child, so that might explain why am I kind of loud when I come into the room? Why do I seek a lot of attention? Because I was that one that there wasn't quite time for. Then my little sister was the baby. And I grew up in northern Minnesota, a town of 10,000 people, first city on the Mississippi. Dad was a pastor, and I grew up focused on school and focused on sports, especially hockey and football. And I had my first drink. After I graduated from high school, after my senior year, all my friends drank in high school. And I would come on Monday mornings after the weekend, and I would hear about the escapades that had taken place. But I was never invited. I never found the opportunity until that summer after I graduated, and I found myself out at the county fair. And one of my friends had a trailer, and he had some friends over. He was staying there during the fair, and they had those red Solo cups. You've probably held one in your hands. They were drinking rum and cokes. And finally, they asked me that magic question, would you like one? It was the first time I'd ever been asked. And I had one, and I drank it pretty fast, and then I waited for them to ask me, would you like another one? And from that day on, things were different in my life. I didn't know when it was going to be. I didn't know how it was going to happen. But I knew I was going to do that again. I can still remember how it made me feel. I can remember taking that first sip of a rum and coke, and I can remember how it felt going down, how all of a sudden everything got a little tingly down to my toes, and I started to feel good. And if you think I'm loud now, I was even louder. But that was kind of the way things happened. I got home, no consequences, no problems. I went off to college and soon found myself in situations where it was available. And I only would drink 1 day a week at first. You ever make those rules? Only Friday or Saturday, and then pretty soon it was Friday and Saturday. Then pretty soon it was Thursday and Friday and Saturday, and then pretty soon it was Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, Friday, Saturday, and in a very short period of time, I had become a daily drinker. And there were these strange things that kept happening. Some of you would call them consequences. Then I experienced what, people talk about in addiction and recovery. I experienced loss of control. I experienced continued use despite consequences. I experienced a tolerance. It took more and more to get me drunk. And I experienced that really troubling thing called denial. And, school was going okay. I wasn't having financial problems. I was a student. But after those consequences would happen, I would reach out to get some help. And I was in college at Gustavus Adolphus College. Some of you may know that. Anybody here a graduate of Gustavus? Anybody else? No. Fantastic. I hope he gets a good education. I got a great one. But I got a really good one in how to drink. And I reached out for help after one of those consequences and went into counseling. The counselor pulled the DSM-4 off of the shelf because he didn't want to say you're an alcoholic. He wanted to read the definition from the diagnostic and say, does this sound like you? And of course I said, well, I've never lost a job. It's not affecting my relationships. All of that was untrue. But I couldn't see it. And my friends and roommates would say things like, what, are you never going to drink ever again? And that's all it would take, because I quit lots of times. My problem wasn't quitting. My problem was staying stopped. And in that process, everything that I cared about went away. I stopped playing sports. The people I loved set boundaries and said, we're not really excited to be around this. But it couldn't be the drinking. After certain spurts of getting on the wagon or stopping drinking for a period of time, the idea at 21, 22 of stopping forever was inconceivable. And so eventually I'd pick back up. I ended up applying and going to seminary. And that's when the wheels really fell off. I went to Pacific Lutheran Theological Seminary in Berkeley, California. I know there's some graduates here. And I got introduced to some chemicals other than alcohol that really accelerated. I do have a classmate from seminary who's sitting somewhere right over there. She saw, or maybe heard, or knows, don't talk to Holly too much. She might remember some of those things. But I, again, had consequences. And finally came to that point where I was supposed to go on internship. And things weren't going well. I knew I was going to have to shape up and really, be on my best behavior during my internship, because I was going to be under a little different level of scrutiny. And so I thought I'd just get all my partying out of my system before that, and went on a trip where we went to a couple of concerts 3 nights in a row and put enough chemicals in my body to really create some havoc. Ended up at Alta Bates, which is the hospital system. Didn't think I was ever going to be sane ever again. And I reached out for help in a different way. I was told later on, you can't save your ass and your face at the same time. All those previous times when I reached out for help, it was really to save face. It was really to try and get out of the consequences, get the heat off, have things be okay. At this time, things were different. And I reached out for help at the seminary. I reached out to one of my professors, and my professor looked at me and literally said, I'm not sure what to do. She took the yellow pages out and started to flip through it. And then she admitted to me, she said, you would think we would have some better resources at the seminary. And she called a couple of treatment centers. Of course, in Berkeley, California, there was nobody who had a bed, and she kind of sat there after 2.5 hours of making phone calls and not knowing what to do. And we kind of said a prayer, and I went back to my dorm room, reached out to another person, and They simply said, I think you should go to AA. I said, you don't understand. I got serious problems, and that's not going to be enough. Went around and talked to other people, talked to my CPE supervisor, and talked about the drugs I'd been taking. And the psychiatrist at John Muir Medical Center said something to me. He said, well, you are what you put in your mouth. Didn't like that very much. Didn't know what to do. Exhausted the options I had, called up my family. My dad, who was pastor in northern Minnesota, flew out. It was clear there wasn't going to be a treatment option in California, and so I flew back to Minnesota to live in my parents' basement. I reached out to the alcohol educator and assessor for Beltrami County. Gary Campbell is his name. And Gary said, yeah, if you come and talk with me, we'll talk about what's going on. We'll do an assessment and we'll see where things are at. I sat down with him on a Tuesday and he said, you ready to go to treatment? I said, what do you mean, like today? He's like, yep, got a bed for you. I said, well, today might be a little quick for me. How about Thursday? I went home, packed my bags, and that became the turning point for me. And in that process, I got to learn what was going on with me. I got an education and I got some language for what had been going on in my life, because before that I just kept saying, why is all of this happening? Why is life so hard? Why does it work out? Why are all the people that I care about and the people that I want to, hang out with not want to be with me? And why can't I seem to just have things work like other people? And that alcohol, became the focus of my life and that turning point. I said for the first time at my first meeting of Alcoholics Anonymous, my name is Bohdan, and I couldn't say I was an alcoholic. All I could say was, I don't want to drink today. And they had told me, tradition 3, all you got to say is you don't want to drink. All you got to have is a desire to not drink. Now, I didn't know which end was up. I just knew something had to change. And people started to talk about the allergy of the body and the obsession of the mind. They started to talk about the disease concept. They say things like, you're not a bad person who needs to get good. You're a sick person who needs to get well. They had to use, and sorry to use this one during dinner, but they had to use the concept of sickness and said, if you think willpower is going to get you sober, think about this. Next time you're on the toilet with diarrhea, try and use willpower to stop yourself from taking a shit. It's not going to work. And that's what needed to come into me. That idea that it was an illness, that the disease concept, that concept of it's not a matter of just trying, it's not a matter of willpower, it's not a matter of me just figuring it out and then I won't struggle. That idea of step 1, which had been so baffling, why is all of this happening? Because I'm powerless over alcohol and that my life is unmanageable. That turning point in my life. And 28-day inpatient treatment later, getting some education, starting to understand who I am, that word alcoholic is something that's powerful, because I learned later from Ernst Kurtz in one of his books, if you know who you are, you know where you belong. And it became pretty clear I knew I belonged in Alcoholics Anonymous, because people shared that they drank and used like I did, but they didn't have to anymore. And I didn't understand that process, but it became real for me in treatment when I did my 5th step. There was, if you know the steps, step 1, we admitted, and step 5, we admitted. There was a deeper level of admission in step 5, admitted to God, ourselves, and another human being the exact nature of our wrongs. And that admission. Later at a meeting, somebody told me, when you go to the movie theater and they give you a ticket and it says admit 1, you give it to the person at the door, they tear it, and you get to go inside. It was that turning point in my life where I started to see all of these events in a little bit different light. And somebody at a meeting short after said a phrase that I couldn't shake. They said to me, "Bohdan, despite all the evidence to the contrary, God does love you." And that's what all of my life had been up to that point. As a pastor's kid, as somebody with consequences, a lot of that shit was stuff that God could have stopped if he wanted to, as a lot of people have said and experienced. But somehow that little phrase, that little thought got in my head, and kind of like a virus that replicates over and over again. There wasn't an exact moment where all of a sudden I get it, but that simple idea started to come in that despite all the evidence to the contrary, because there was just so much evidence in my life. Not that there wasn't a God, but that God didn't care about me. And in that process we call recovery, there were conversations and there was all kinds of experiences that I had. And one of the big ones was step 3. Because I wasn't going to turn my will and life over to the care of something that I didn't think cared about me. I had trust issues. Anybody here have trust issues? I got trust issues. I have other issues, but trust issues is a big one. And that idea that, I'm going to turn my life over to something that's going to care for me. A year after getting sober, after going back and doing my internship, I came to my first Fellowship of Recovering Lutheran Clergy retreat. Cumberland Furnace, Tennessee, middle of nowhere. 17 pastors in recovery were there at a place called Turning Point, I believe, a pretty famous treatment center. And one of the pastors at that retreat said some things that completely shifted my life. Paul DeMont, who some of you know, shared that he was sober, and he said this idea of faith, it's no longer a matter of faith. That he had had a direct experience of the power of God alive in his life. And so it was no longer a matter of theory or faith. He had had an experience where God had reached into his life and changed things that he could not change, and he couldn't deny it. That the power of God had been experienced in his life and was real in reorganizing and reforming, transforming, whatever language you want to use. And I sat there and said, is that what's happened in my life? I wish, I had come up with all these things. I wish I had come up with all these understandings and insights. I wish it was I sat down and did the step work, and I've gotten to ride the coattails of some really great people in recovery. And I'm grateful I don't have to be the first person to walk the path of recovery. I really wanted to figure it out when I first came in, and still some days I really want to figure it out. But that turning point came, can I just follow directions? And can I allow God to work in my life and hear what God is doing? And all of that stuff that had tried to be shoved down my throat when I reached out for help, and even though the therapists and the counselors and other people were really good at it, like the guy who pulled out the DSM-4 and just read it and wasn't going to say, you're an alcoholic, it might have actually helped if he would have just said, you're an alcoholic. But he wasn't going to do it. And so for me, at the age of 24, I came into recovery. A year later, I was at the end of my internship, came to my first Fellowship Recovering Lutheran Clergy. I was attending meetings regularly. I was experiencing transformation in my life. Things were moving in a different direction. I ultimately get married. I get my first call. Amazing things are happening. Gratitude is full of my life. Even got to do an internship at Hazelden Treatment Center. It was a fantastic experience. Got to listen to Fifth Steps and that experience that became the turning point and entry point really into recovery for me. I got to give that back. I got to listen to 2 or 3 Fifth Steps a day at Hazelden for a summer. It was amazing. And to come into that holy experience with another person as they're getting honest and sharing stuff. And I learned there's a difference between a treatment Fifth Step and somebody who's been sober for a while Fifth Step. But for me, those experiences were some of the most holy ever in my life. And when I came into sobriety, I thought I had flushed my career down the toilet. I didn't know if I would be welcome back at seminary. I didn't know if I was going to be able to graduate. I didn't know what the larger church was going to say. And my recovery has been the biggest gift. I've learned more in recovery and from people in recovery than I learned from my seminary professors. And still with that, I've had to hit some bottoms in recovery. I'm a big believer in what Ernie Larson calls stage 2 recovery. If you've ever read his book or know anything about it, stage 1 is physical abstinence. Stage 2 is what other people would call emotional sobriety. And 10 years sober, I hit a bottom because my first wife said, I don't think I want to be married anymore. And I sat there and some of that same old guilt and blame and shame came up for me, and I couldn't handle my emotions. I'm 10 years sober thinking, hey, I'm pretty good. I'm pretty far on this road, and I am under the ocean with my feelings and overwhelmed. I can't sleep. I'm pacing back and forth. I would wake up and just go for a walk because I couldn't calm down. I had to be so physically tired at the end of the day to get any amount of sleep. And I called up one of my friends who, he's not a Lutheran, he's a Swedenborgian. Anybody ever heard of a Swedenborgian pastor? And he's a Swedenborgian. There's only a handful of them in the world, I found out. But I told him, I can't be on my own. Can I come over and just hang out at your house? And 10 years sober, I had him say, well, I got work to do. I got stuff that I'm doing, but, you can come over. I'll be there. I'm going to have to do these things, but, you don't have to be alone. My kids are home. He had 4 kids. The twins were 4 years old at the time. And I came over to his house and sat on his couch. His 4-year-old daughter was watching Little Orphan Annie. Now, some of you have met my first ex-wife. We'll get to that in a minute. But she's a redhead, really loved Little Orphan Annie, and it was not what I wanted to see on the TV. And so after about 15 minutes of trying to just sit there and gut it out, I walk out into his front yard just to take a couple of breaths. And his daughter follows me out. And I stand there trying to figure out what to do. I got a 4-year-old looking up at me, staring me in the face, and the two of us stand in his front yard and saying, if you think of a day that's gray and lonely, just pick up your chin and grin and say, tomorrow, bet your bottom dollar that tomorrow there'll be sun. Now, you might test me on those words. They might not be exactly the way it was, but the 4-year-old didn't care. We sat there and sang at the top of our lungs. My friend Mark calls that the gospel according to Janine. That was her name. And this idea of hope started to creep back into my life. I'd like to say it was from a Bible study. I would like to say it was from a church experience. I'd like to say, but it was a 4-year-old who saved my life that day. And it was a 4-year-old who was present in the moment, able to reflect something back to me about God's grace and love. And that even though I felt like my life was over yet again, I could see maybe there was a possibility. Well, as some of you know, I, get back into recovery, get back into ministry. It was hard to get back up in front of that congregation. It was hard to wear that badge now, not just of recovering pastor, but divorced pastor in recovery. Let me tell you, the dating profile looks fantastic. And ended up getting married again, get back on my feet, things are going well, and 8 years later, I go through my second divorce. I actually was traveling out of the country, landed with a tour group back in San Diego, text my wife to say, landed, can you come pick me up? She said, well, I'm up at a funeral in North County, but Walter will pick you up. He picks me up, we walk into the front door, I look over and say, oh, she moved her bookcase. Look over and see a manila envelope with my name written on it, and then look around and notice all her stuff is moved out. And for the second time in recovery, I get to go through something. Didn't realize how healthy my first divorce was until I went through my second divorce. I don't say that to brag. I don't say that because I'm proud of it. In fact, I had to do an awful lot of work to be able to stand back up in front of a congregation. I went to intensive outpatient, worked one-on-one 5 to 6 hours a day with a therapist down in Rochester, Minnesota. I started doing things to try and understand feelings because 18 years into this sobriety journey, I had to admit I didn't understand feelings. Started to do weird things like watch Mr. Rogers. If you haven't seen the documentary that was released back in 2018, it is probably one of the best things you could ever watch, where you hear Mr. Rogers talk about what he was trying to do in educating children to deal with feelings, and that he grew up in a family that wasn't allowed to express feelings, especially anger. And some things that I had heard from people at the Fellowship of Recovering Lutheran Clergy, especially Al Dungan, who used to be a big part of this crowd. Al said every dysfunctional family follows 3 rules. Don't talk, don't feel, and don't trust. And I had to open up the door and admit, I got this other problem other than just chemicals. I got this thing called codependency that's in my life. And it's creating problems to try and caretake people and to try to control other people and to try to figure out how to have relationships that are one-sided. And I had to start to look and grow. And even this afternoon when we heard in the movie, people learned how to have relationships. I thought I was doing pretty good 18 years sober. And I thought I knew how to have relationships, but the proof was in the pudding. When the 12 and 12 says, we were unable to form a true partnership with another human being. When the big book says things like, a better test is how our relationships are in our homes, businesses, and affairs. It was easy to have healthy relationships in AA. During a meeting, it was easy to have healthy relationships for an hour on a Sunday morning with people at church and smile and nod and be, that person and have people project on you. But to actually try and negotiate with another person, to actually make decisions together, to have a house. I mean, it's hard to admit this, my home economic skills aren't the greatest. And some people think they should be. So, my dating profile this last time said, bachelor number 1 is either a semi-pro hockey player, a dentist, a Lutheran pastor, and I tried to have some fun with it, but it's tough. I did just get remarried for the 3rd time to a woman who's in her 3rd marriage. She's a marriage and family therapist, so man, it's interesting. And we get to talk about these things called feelings and what's coming up for you and that idea of recovery and what is my side of the street and what's your side of the street. That reality is there is still a lot of work in my life. God's not done with me yet, as a lot of people say. There's still a lot of room for growth. Maybe you know that, another fucking growth opportunity. And I've been 16 years in the congregation I'm in San Diego. I served in Sacramento, California, and Fargo, North Dakota before that. And I'm grateful to have a community that's able and willing to, face some things with me. To go through 2 divorces in the same congregation, I'm shocked I'm still there. But for me, I continue to learn not just about myself, as people talk about, the road narrows. Behavior that I could get away with, when I was first in the rooms, today keeps me up at night. And I've had to learn to let go of some of that too, because in relationships with congregation members, it's not going to be perfect. And I struggle with that at times. And I take the blame for that at times. And there are most of the time where it should be that way, because the relationship doesn't exist for me. But how do I get my needs met? And if you're clergy or somebody who's in the church, you know how that can be kind of hard. And 18 years sober, I started working with a guy who said some things that blew me away. I'd been coming to the Fellowship Recovering Lutheran Clergy retreat almost annually. And he held some things up about relationships, and he said, pastor's family, alcoholic family, same dysfunction. There's an internal life and an external life. Everybody is trying to protect dad's job. Impression management is important. And they see him and think things are great, and you've seen him in his underwear. There's a lot of truth in that. And for me, as I continue down this journey and path, there are things that I continue to get surprised and astounded by. Some things that start to make sense, and I continue to get language. And every time I come to this conference, this is now the 4th one I've been at, I learn things that, I'm grateful for. I'm learning things that don't necessarily turn the light switch on and make everything make sense. But some things start to move, and every time, and that's been one of the biggest things I've had to learn in recovery, is I got to continue to grow. And when I hit that bottom, 18 years sober, and people started saying some of those simple things like, you can't coast uphill. Eventually your momentum gives up. If you stop going, you're not going to keep going. And the idea of a progressive and fatal disease, I used to think, that means that, if you pick back up, you drank a fifth of, booze then, you'll drink a fifth of booze here or even more. But there was a guy in Berkeley at the Berkeley Fellowship who said, I'm 32 years sober, and that means I'm 32 years worse off if it's a progressive and fatal disease. John McDougall used to make a graph at Hazelden Treatment Center, and he would say, if it's progressive, it means it's going up. And if your recovery doesn't at least keep pace with the progression of your disease, you're in relapse. And it's hard for me to admit that there have been times where my disease has overtaken the work that I've had. And yet the reality is I'm grossly overpaid in recovery. It's a free gift that's been given to me. Jeff Bernosky, who was my supervisor at Hazelden as a treatment, he looked at me one day, I'm just over a year sober, and he looks at me and he says, are you proud of your recovery? Or are you grateful for it? And we had a conversation where he said, if you're proud of it, it means you've earned it, you've achieved it, you've done something. If you're grateful, it means it's a free gift that's been given to you. I'll end with an idea from Bill Wilson. He said, imagine one alcoholic who can't stop drinking lecturing another alcoholic who can't stop drinking. I couldn't stop. Something happened in my life. Paul DeMont was right. People didn't lecture me. People didn't say much. They shared what their experience was, and I could take what I need and leave the rest. I was able to apply it and have my experience with my higher power, and I'm really grateful for that. I'm grateful that you're all here. I'll be forever grateful for Ed, and I told him years ago, I'll continue to come to FRLC events and Center for Addiction and Faith events to pay back what was given to me when I came, and I want this event to be able to continue to go on. So even if I just get to come and pay for my ticket so that other people can come, I just want to ask, who's here for the first time? I want to say thank you for having the courage and strength to come. I've known some of these people in this room for a long time. I've known Louise for a lot of years now, and maybe you just met Louise. But I'm grateful that you're here. I was told you can have a meeting without me, but I can't have one without you. We've heard a lot about community, and for me, this community has given me something that I forever will be grateful for. It's brought me back to a relationship with a power greater than myself that's working in my life, and today I'm able to say cares for me. And today it's not despite all the evidence to the contrary. I see evidence of God's work all over the place in my life, and that might be normal for you. But I don't wake up every morning saying, boy, it's great to be alive. But I'm great to be alive today, and it's a privilege and an honor to be with you. Thanks for listening to me.
Well, if you look at your program, you see that we are just absolutely blessed this evening to get ready to hear from Dr. Monty Burks. And Dr. Burks and I met on a conference call that was initiated by Health and Human Services to talk about what we've been talking about our entire time here. And you can read all about him. He's got a list of accolades and list of things behind his name. But I wanted to just kind of tell you what I think about Monty Burks. Monty Burks is a tireless advocate for faith and folks in recovery. He is one of us in recovery. But the thing that I most love about Monty is Monty always gives so much of himself in what he does, and he gives it away freely. When I first began the work that I do in Ohio, it was because of the inspiration of Monty Burks and what they're doing in Tennessee. And Monty's influence has moved all the way from Tennessee to the White House. And Monty is by far and away, in my opinion, the foremost leader in this country when it comes to activating the church and helping the church find their role when it comes to serving people with substance use disorder and mental illness. And so I am absolutely honored to introduce you to my friend, and you'll get to hear his story. Will you welcome Dr. Monty Burks?
I love you. I love you back. Good evening. Good evening. All right, I'm going to do myself a favor and not stand behind this podium because it's taller than me. I am going to go ahead and preface my presentation before I tell you anything about me. I am from the deep southern South, so I have two words that I use that might not be in your lexicon, but they're in mine. So I want to make sure y'all on the same page with me. Y'all and ain't are my two words. Y'all and ain't are words in Southern dictionaries. They might not be in your dictionary, but they're in mine. So bear with me during my presentation. If you want to giggle about me, giggle with me. Fair enough? Is that a little too loud? Am I too loud or is that good? All right, I'm going to move around a little bit. So I'm thankful to be here. I heard somebody say Drew Brooks' name. And I met Drew years ago. Greg and myself and Drew were invited to North Carolina to discuss addiction with a room full of pastors that weren't really ready to have conversations about different paths to recovery. Now, if you work in the recovery community, you know that people have different paths to recovery, and when a person identifies and tells you, this is how I found my freedom, you respect how they found their freedom. I'm a man of faith. I found my freedom in the church. I have people that I work with that did not find their recovery journey through the church. They found their way back to the church. I have worked with many churches that would not accept people who took medication for their addiction. I have worked with many churches who would not accept people who took medication for mental illness. People still find their way back. David empowered people that were different to lead and command. Moses took people who did not appreciate him and led them out of captivity in the wilderness and then back out of the wilderness. There are all of these different paths to freedom that people have taken since the beginning of written history. And I think it's beautiful. I got to hear my brother from California talk about his stuff. I loved it. I told him he was step 13. He's resiliency. So I'm going to talk to you about faith, recovery, and connection. So here's my cool contact information. I don't know what I'm saying in that picture right there. I have no idea. I got somebody to help me make my slides and throw some pictures in, so that's me. I was saying something, I bet it was something about hot wings. If my hand goes above my tie, something tasted good that day. It's elevated me. So I currently serve as the Deputy Director of Tennessee's Governor's Office of Faith-Based and Community Initiatives. My job in the Governor's Office is to connect all of the communities together with the overall goal of building workforce development, working with people that have been formerly incarcerated, working with people that are in recovery, people that are still trying to find their freedom, people that are in treatment programs. Us, everybody in here is in recovery from something. Whether you identify that way or not is up to you. But if you say that you're not and you're an adult, you're telling a story once you realize what recovery means. In my former role, I was the director of faith-based initiatives with our Tennessee State Department of Mental Health and Substance Abuse Services. I'm going to be brief about this, but I'll tell you something that I was able to do in that role, and that's where I met Pastor Greg. I was able to start as a one-man band on a mission to figure out how to trigger the church to do the work it's supposed to do. It took me a little while, took a little energy. I grew up, my mother's a missionary evangelist in a Pentecostal church, and my daddy was Catholic. Ain't nothing y'all can say to me that I ain't heard. I'll be honest with y'all, I was not Pentecostal during football season. I was definitely Catholic during football season. In, out, gone. I'm trying to get to the game. Because during Pentecostal season, 2 hours in, that's halftime at church. But I was given an opportunity through ministry work and government work together to hire not one, not two, but 26 people that are in recovery, people that have been formerly incarcerated, people that had been forgotten about, people that sometimes their communities didn't realize that just because they were in the paper once 20 years ago didn't mean that's who they still were. I hired 26 people and they were my recovery advocates across the state, and we turned upside down how government serves people. Listen, I'll tell this, I'll say this, and I'll say it a million times. Government is not the answer. Government is a resource for people in the community. The community is the answer. Church, you're the answer. The movers and the shakers in every community is that four-wall box that you worship in. That's a gas station for you to get full and go out and work. And whatever that work looks like, I'm a big fan of Celebrate Recovery, so don't get me hurt, habit, and hanging up in here, because I will do that. So I'm a fitness and mental health coach. I teach jiu-jitsu and mixed martial arts. I'm a former professional MMA fighter. I've actually trained with some guys up here in Minnesota. I think everybody up here wrestles. I don't know what that's about. Yeah. Even the little kids like, hey, take down. I'm like, stop. I just wanted to pray with you. I mean, he knows I'm telling the truth. But I grew up, part of my recovery journey, and I'll share that in a few minutes, was in the mixed martial arts world. I grew up in a family of people that were gym rats. My aunt's a former Olympian kickboxer. She has actually kicked me in my head and put me down before, and y'all keep her in your prayers. I remind her of that often. But that was part of my recovery journey, was to figure out how to get other playground and playmates to help me reacclimate. Because I needed to not only, listen, I found my freedom, but I had to sustain my freedom. There are relapse triggers everywhere you walk. There are opportunities to go back to misery. Listen, if you don't know how to fellowship, you'll fellowship with who you've been running from. Because it's easier to ride a bicycle the way you've been taught, even though you might have been taught the wrong way. So I got into a martial arts gym, and me and my friends started punching each other in the face, and that was how I kept my freedom. I know it sounds like an odd journey, but it actually kept me grounded. Sunday school, Wednesday service, and fighting my friends 7 days a week. I told you, man, you're step 13, I'm step 14. So know this. I'm going to talk to you as ministry leadership about the people we serve. I got a little time, so bear with me. If it's something that I say, you don't like it, cool. Tell me about it later, after you have cake. I want all the good stuff in you, up in there. It's okay to not be okay. You're not alone in this. The work that we do causes compassion, fatigue, and burnout. No matter what you say or how you do it, you know sometimes that you just get to the edge of wherever you are because you tried so hard to do things and it's just not working out for you, and Jimmy won't come back, and he left and he's not coming back to his program and he's not following his case management work, and you're burned out. It's okay to not be okay, and it's also okay to let somebody else help you wear the burden. That's what friends and the recovery community is for. That's why I think the whole world needs to go through a 12-step meeting right now. The whole world. For people in your family that don't understand what the 12 steps are, hit them up and take them to step 4. Leave them on fearless and moral inventory. That'll bring the narcissist out of somebody. So part of our journey is understanding we're communities of faith. I've had the privilege of working in every single Christian denomination in the country that I can know of. Listen, there's some new ones that pop up on me, and I'm like, I did not know that y'all had put those two together. That's great. You know how church folks are, a little bit of resentment and some coffee. We got a whole new denomination in 30 minutes. But I've had the pleasure of working with different churches, different groups, and I've also worked with people who don't have the same faith as I do. And listen, my faith encourages me to work with all people. My job is to go out and spread the gospel in the way that I've been given. I am the product of the successful application of the gospels in my life by my family. I get it. I don't compromise my faith. I don't compromise my story for anybody. I will break bread with just about anybody in the world unless they just don't like me. And then I'll still try to break bread with them because I'll try to figure out why they don't like me. But our spiritual practices, I think, bring us to that, because part of that spiritual work that we have in our recovery journey is we know how to disarm people. We're given a gift to talk to people and actively listen to people in their journey. I think that's religion is one thing, but spirituality is the connection and the relationship we make with people. Chill, hold up, wait a minute, listen. Wow. We might find common ground if we just slow down and give somebody a chance to tell their own story. The cool thing about growing up my mother played the piano. I am traumatized by my mom when I was a kid. I love her, but my mom used to play those A and B selections in church. You know, Pentecostal, I don't know exactly what still A and B selection means. I'm just going to say that out loud. But she would make me sing when nobody else was there on Sunday. I cannot sing. To this day, if I see her playing, I'll just duck my head in this pew and just get real low. It's like, Mama, don't do that to me. But all of that, it gave me an opportunity sometimes to not be afraid to get out in front of people. And then I wasn't afraid to talk to people. I'm not afraid to be embarrassed. I'm not afraid to be embarrassed. And in my recovery journey, I remember that I needed to talk to people, but nobody would talk about their addiction. People were quiet about it because I needed some help back in the day, and people were so embarrassed about their journey that they wouldn't tell you they had a problem. They whisper about it. And all the meetings were in the mop room at the church. Like, you could have a meeting at the church, but you couldn't really tell anybody about the meeting at the church, and the church technically wouldn't own the meeting at the church. It was just a meeting they had with some people who smell like cigarettes. Just an FYI, if you smell cigarettes and coffee at a recovery meeting, you know it is fire going on in that meeting right there. But that gave me an opportunity to connect with people. Tell my story, reach for people, let people reach for me. And I've always been really loud about my story. So some of the things that I used in my journey, and I'm going to tell you all about my journey in a few minutes, but I want to say this early because I'm trying to build a framework for the story to let you know who I am and why I do what I do. So I believe in cognitive behavioral therapy. Absolutely. I think that counselors, pastors, clergy, everyone needs to understand ABCs of rational self-counseling. REBT. You don't have to be a therapist to work with a therapist. You also don't have to have acronyms behind your name to love somebody. I said it. ABC, awareness, belief, consequence. That's it. Something as simple as that could be an opportunity for someone who has been struggling to find freedom through your access to the tools that they don't know how to use. There's a lot of resources out there for people. But people sometimes don't know how to access resources because they're dealing with so many other things that have them weighed down. I mean, imagine you are the person who's the overseer of a recovery program, and you're like, hey, I've got this meeting every Friday night and it's free for you. And you tell that one person that came in, you know they need to come to the meeting, you can just feel it. Your discernment level is out the roof. And you tell them to come back, and then you don't actually ask them the question you should have asked them. How are you doing? Have you eaten today? Do you have transportation? Do you have water? Do you have kids? Are you homeless? It's like all of these other things happen. And I think the CBT, cognitive behavioral therapy, is actually an opportunity for not only the person that delivers but it's also for the person across from you, for people to connect. Mindfulness and meditation, practice learning triggers. We all have them. How many of you can be triggered to something positive? That's fair. I can go to my mother's house and hear something cling in the kitchen, and I think she's cooking something, and my salivatory glands go AWOL. I'm like, girl, what you doing in that kitchen? She's like, get out of my kitchen right now. That's the church woman. Medication. All of us might not agree on the concept of medication when it's mixed with treatment. Let me throw something at you. I'm a heart patient. I've had 2 heart attacks. I had a 100% blockage in my right coronary artery. I was supposed to die. I made it out. There was some genetic issues. There was also some life choice issues from way back that caught up with me. I take medication because I have a titanium stent in my chest. I'm going to take medication. I love y'all, but I'm going to take medication. Medication for people who have other issues. There might be something else going on inside their brain that needs them to have another connection to help them sustain their freedom. Sustaining freedom is not up to the other person. It's to the person who's trying to be free. Sometimes we speak to people from our own insecurities, our own vulnerabilities, and our own weaknesses. So when somebody's weaker than you, addiction is the only thing that we want people to get better our way, not their way. I got clean this way. You should too. Maybe not. Maybe not. And again, this is an opportunity for us to connect. What happened to someone? What's wrong with someone? So I heard somebody said something a little while ago. It's just what happened, not what's wrong. Listen, I'm from the South. If you ask me what's wrong with me, you know what my response is going to be to you. What's wrong with you? That's wrong with me. The symptoms you see are usually adaptations to a trauma. What you see is usually an adaptation to something that has happened to someone. And healing can happen if we learn kindness and empathy. I'm not asking you to be an empath. I'm simply saying walk in somebody's shoes. Listen, don't feel sorry for me. You feel sorry from across the street. Great. Thank you. Throw a rock at me. Eventually I'll be okay. Get in my shoes with me for a minute. People in the recovery space know game recognizes game. People know when you love them. People know when you're trying to love them back to life. So how can communities of faith help shape the understanding of recovery? A welcoming of all stories and paths. I have heard some recovery stories that have had more F-bombs in them than ever by some of the strongest people in the world. Guess what? I don't want them to tell the story the way I want to hear it. I want them to tell them the way they want to say it. Because sometimes people need to get it out. Let them get it out. Listen, our job isn't to save anybody. That's something entirely out of our framework. Our job is to love people back to life. So sometimes they might come in a little dirty. Matter of fact, the people that have got the dirtiest past usually make the best recovery advocates. I mean, that kind of goes back to scripture. You can read sometimes we need heroes that can turn everything upside down. Call people by their name. Hey, I'm all about people first, person-centered, people first language. Don't call somebody by a diagnosis. That's when you said it earlier about somebody wanted to read all the things about you. What a traumatizing way to find out that something might be going on in your life. A whole paragraph about, goodness gracious, wow, that's me. No, it's not. Seek people out, meet them where they are, and stand in awe about people's hardships. I had learned that just because I hit rock bottom, it doesn't mean that that was all the way at the bottom. I woke up in a jail cell. That was the first time. I grew up in the church. I grew up Pentecostal. We really went to church 19 times a week, maybe 20. If you're from the South and you understand Pentecostal South, you totally get it. I hit rock bottom. I woke up in a jail cell, And I was like, man, this has got to be the worst. Every one of those Sunday school messages meant something to me at that moment because that was my moment of clarity right there. But there was a man beside me that had sores all over his body. And that was about his 50th time coming to jail. And then I realized that I thought I hit rock bottom, but I hadn't even seen the bottom yet. It caused me to respect other people's paths and remember that I had something to do. And part of my something to do was take that message out to other people that might need it. Listen, y'all, please, if you can, if a person's in the grocery store and you feel like they need you to say hi, say hi. Just say hi. Doesn't mean you're going to provide a service, but you might be providing enough love for them to love somebody else. It's got to start somewhere. So the overarching goal is to help people find how to be resilient. Again, our last speaker, I told him his step 13 is resiliency. If there's a picture of resiliency in a book, it is him. So in its simplest terms, resiliency is the domino stop here. Just because it happened before doesn't mean that it has to continue to happen. You can't go back and change what happened to you or to anybody else. However, looking forward, you can be stronger. Remember the thing that happened and use it to do something great. Some of the resilient attitudes that we exhibit and the people that we serve exhibit are commitment, control, and challenge. Establish an unwavering dedication to the path you've chosen. I've done that in my recovery journey. So Pastor Greg can tell you, as a good friend of mine, I've got to speak from one person to 8,000 people on a recovery journey. Can you imagine 8,000 people that are stone-faced looking at you talk about addiction? I had sweat coming out in places I didn't even know I could sweat. I was terrified. I had one or two people that were looking straight through me. I think they were halfway asleep, but they could have been just staring at me in meanness. But I was committed to share my story because when I needed help, there was not people talking about recovery. As a matter of fact, we didn't even call it recovery back then. Everything was rehabilitation at one point. Everything was, you need rehab, you need to go to rehab. Okay, cool. But nobody's talking about it. Rehab was like way across the street. It was this big castle across the road that I couldn't afford. And now we have people that are on every corner with signs. You see church signs that says, celebrate recovery. You see bulletin boards that have people that say, I survived. You see billboards that say Narcan is available, naloxone in this community. You see commercials where people that have been formerly incarcerated and were intravenous drug users are now professors at colleges. You see pastors and clergy now not hiding the fact that they used to use and that it's okay to not be okay. That's that commitment. Part of the commitment is to share to other people, because if you don't say it out loud, the person that might need you to hear it might not hear it from anybody else. Control, focus on what you can influence and what you can change. I can't do nothing for you, but I'll tell you what I can do for me. I can make sure that I'm healthy enough to tell you the truth when I can. And I hope that we can give a hug about it. If not, we can fist bump, share some pie, and go on about our business. Challenge. View difficult situations as an opportunity to learn and grow. How many of you in the recovery, I'm not asking you in recovery, but working in the recovery space, have you had to learn and grow? Ooh, boy. I've talked to a couple of different state legislatures, and some of them, I thought they were ready to have the recovery conversation, and we couldn't even get on an agreement on what the word recovery meant. And then we threw in the word treatment. We were throwing daggers at each other. So let's build this framework now. By the way, the pictures of the people I use are people that I work with. This is Maurice and Alan. These are two guys that work on two different parts of my team. They are two of the coolest dudes in the world. I won't tell anybody's story that they wouldn't tell themselves. Both of them are in long-term recovery. Both of them have been formerly incarcerated, and both of them know every single 80s rap song word verbatim. And they will not cuss in the song. They know on unison when to not say the bad words. I'm like, yeah, recovery strikes again. But both of these guys are part of a much bigger process. Alan, the guy to the left, actually started. He's a product of people like us, people like you, that gave a minute of their time. Some people at his church helped walk him on his journey when he was released from prison. He is now a recovery advocate. He's been in a good space for, I think, 17 years. He started a program called Recovery is the New High. And it's in just about every single county in Tennessee. So we get people that are supporting people in recovery and they'll put the sign in their yard. What we're trying to do is normalize the conversation around recovery. Take the taboo, take the stigma away. It's okay to not be okay. It's okay to not be okay. And Maurice, the guy to the right, loves to teach suicide prevention stuff. He calls it stuff. I like it that he calls it stuff. He has a unique education and background in finance. And he said, we got to take these conversations to the finance community, because in that community, they're not going to tell you that they have any kind of addiction issues, because they're going to lose certifications, jobs. Nobody's going to trust them. So they started having these unique conversations. He started with suicide prevention and ended up doing addiction 101 trainings for over 1,000 people, just because he knew how to target a new community. So both of these guys, one of the things that they push into their communities, especially with leadership, is the concept of mindfulness. Have we all done the mindfulness training before? Everybody here familiar with mindfulness? So one of the things I want to really stress about mindfulness is suspending judgment. Take a second to suspend judgment. Why? So the whole concept of addiction, the word addiction, can sometimes be heavy. We're in an addiction conference, so the word addiction, it's not heavy to us, it's an opportunity to talk. But what about your cousin that every time they see the word addiction, it's always associated with criminal conduct? What about the person at your church that you know they want to help, but they'd rather help from over here because their only experience with addiction is their nephew or their niece that came back home 70 times and took something from them 69 of those? What about those folks? So when we talk about mindfulness in the communities, we always try to get a quick exercise, and I'm not going to do that with you guys, but I want to make sure I say this, is we stress the concept of suspending judgment when you work with people in the recovery space. Because just because it didn't happen to you or you can't see it doesn't mean that it's not happening to them. Sometimes people are misdiagnosed. Sometimes people don't have the right resource. Sometimes we expect people to come back and we don't realize they're sleeping in a car that doesn't work. They have 3 kids and no food. They're giving you the best they've got. They're on probation, they're on parole, which can be some unrelenting things, but they're coming to your meeting or your space, or they're coming to your church, giving you the best they got, but all you see is the front end of that stuff. You don't really see what happens when they leave. So you're like, man, you know what? You got it good. I need you to come back 6 days this week. We're going to go through scripture. We're going to do a case management plan. I'm going to get you in a recovery program. Cool. They haven't eaten in 3 days. They got 2 kids. They got a lot of other stuff they've got to deal with. This is where mindfulness can come in, because sometimes in our professional space, as a clergy person, as a pastor, as a lay leader, as a grandmother, as a grandfather, as a brother, as a sister, as a friend, you can ask questions that might make you feel uncomfortable. Like, hey, man, I got some toothpaste and some deodorant in the back. You know, you good? It's real simple, right? I'm not going to do that on a pulpit. I'm going to do it personal. I'm going to love somebody right there in that space. Sometimes that's all it takes. I had a young man that I worked with. We couldn't get him to come back. I worked in a prison setting. He post-incarceration. We couldn't get him to come back. I noticed something that nobody else had ever asked him. He wore the same outfit every time we saw him. I asked him, did he have any other clothes? He said, no. I said, you wearing the same thing every day? He said, I wash it every day. I called the sheriff. I said, Sheriff, got a guy. Can you help me out? And the sheriff went to, y'all have JCPenney's here in Minnesota? All right, JCPenney's is a fine shopping establishment. I love it. I get 35% off my clothes because I have the card. Yes, they have good dress shirts. The sheriff went to the JCPenney's and bought a few $100s worth of clothes for this young man. And the young man said nobody had ever done that for him. Now, this was about 9 years ago. This young man now works for one of the county governments doing concrete work. But all it took for him was somebody to care about him a little bit. It empowered him and it encouraged him, and it also made him feel like somebody was watching him in a good way. All stories don't work like that, but that one did. That story did. He actually does some really great work. He's a certified peer recovery specialist now. So some things about mindfulness that can help us get to that space is it's not a phenomenon. Anybody can do it. It's a way of living. Always think about suspending judgment when you work with people. I do. I have had people that I'm a man of faith that they do not have a faith tradition at all, and our job is to work on the same recovery project. Y'all know that sometimes can be taxing. It's cool with me. You know why? Maybe they can reach somebody that I can't. Maybe they can reach somebody that I can't. I've got access to a lot of resources. I'm going to throw it the way I throw it. I hope they can throw it the way they throw it. But in the end, In the end, I was given something freely and I'm going to give it to somebody else. So did you know, this is our framework, that incarceration doesn't have to be the end. It actually can be the piece that we need for people to retrain their brain. Are we all familiar with the brain science behind addiction? Y'all know how hard it is to talk about that in some of our churches. I see y'all smiling. I see a few of y'all smiling in the room. It takes 7 days to become dependent on legally prescribed opioids for an abscessed tooth. 7 to 10 days for your body to become dependent. It takes 90 to 100 days for you to control, alt, delete, to kick the process, to start the non-dependence for your body. So when we think that somebody's going to get it right with a weekend in jail or smack on the wrist or I told you not to, we're wrong. Sometimes people need a timeout, whatever the timeout might be. So sometimes it takes a little more for a person to get it together so they can be that champion. There's all kinds of champions out there and they've taken different processes, but we know the guys from the big book, if you've not read the big book, read AA's whole story. Go to aa.org and read through how they figured out that it takes 90 meetings in 90 days to help somebody. You know what the scientists say? It takes 90 to 100 days for somebody to do that kickstart. These guys figured that out way before we had the scientific data behind it. They had it figured out way before. When they built those principles, they figured it out before we had that scientific data. That's powerful. Reintroduction happens about 95% of the time. It's important that we understand that the people that go through these things when we suspend judgment are still our people. How we choose to see people is how we treat them. So if we constantly hold them accountable for something that happened 15 years ago, who are we doing a disservice to? Probably ourselves. Probably us. So how we choose to see people is how we treat them. And how people see themselves could contribute to their actions. So if we want to help people, we want to love people, we want to serve people. I think one of the cool things is start to look at people as people. The whole thing about labeling theory is you start calling somebody something, you dehumanize them. Once you dehumanize them, you make it easier for somebody to mistreat them. Then when somebody mistreats them, they're devalued, then they don't mean anything, and then that person might not ever make it back. Listen, we have an opportunity to fellowship with people. If we don't fellowship with them when they need us to, they're going to go back and fellowship with those they're running from. It's an opportunity for us. So the cool thing about understanding how to look at people is now we have information that can help us look at them a little better. So 1 in 10 people live in poverty in the United States. They can't afford things like healthy foods, healthcare, and housing. People with higher education can avoid that because they know how to use resources. Let me explain something. Higher education doesn't always mean a degree. It just might mean a functional amount of literacy, being able to read. Some communities in the United States don't have 12th grade reading levels. It's like that in every state across the country. When you start looking at sequential intercepts of reading, infant mortality rates, and poverty, all in one thing, you have people that don't understand how to use resources, and it might not be their fault. It might be their granddaddy's fault or their great-granddaddy's fault because, respectfully, they were taught to work in the communities, not necessarily focus on how to change generational poverty or generational addictions or generational health risk. Many neighborhoods in our country are not safe. They have high rates of violence, unsafe water. And again, these are things we have to think about when we start working with people. Some of our racial and ethnic minorities might come from low-income neighborhoods and have more risk factors. I say this to you because if you're in ministry leadership and people come and talk to you and they're a little bit different than you and you got the same prescription for everybody's success, might be missing the boat a little bit. Might want to take into it. I love his tattoos. I got tattoos all over me, man. I've been all over the world. I can identify with a lot of people. I started talking to some folks that were from deep out west Southern California one time about what was going on in Tennessee, and I was mind boggled at how I knew nothing about nothing. They were part of a recovery community, and I know you can empathize with me. They actually put me in my place unintentionally because I was like, yeah, we got all these cool things going on. You know, I love Tennessee, volunteer state, got all this good old stuff. They started talking about things that were coming across the border from the southern side. I was like, whoa, whew, wow. I had no idea because I don't have those same risks in my state because my state's not a border state. So my communities and my neighborhoods are made up a little different. It was a cool chance for me to have a learning moment. Many people face challenges and dangers they can't control, like those unsafe neighborhoods, trouble affording things they need. These things can have a negative impact. So sometimes people need things like medicine, like healthcare. What if they can't get those things because of the neighborhood they live in? You know that there are food deserts in big cities? Do you know why there's sometimes these food deserts exist? Because the poverty in the area causes high crime, and grocery stores can't function because people come in and take things out of the grocery store, so they can't afford to stay there. So what happens is you create food deserts, and then you have lower health. I'm trying to be respectful to people's businesses, but there are places that come in that have all the good canned foods. I love canned food drives, but that's not what some people need. Sometimes we need to look at healthy alternatives. But if that's all they've got, that's all they've got. So you imagine the generational things that happen to children who are not given proper nutrients as they grow. So just real quick, access to healthy foods, neighborhood safety, housing, stability, income level, education quality, and transportation availability. These are things that create opportunities for all the other stuff. We want people to go to treatment, but what if they haven't eaten and they live in a neighborhood that's not good? I work in Memphis, Tennessee. Y'all heard of Memphis? We have some areas in Memphis. I work with high-level clergy, low-level clergy, mid-level clergy, all the church folks. So one of our community programs in Memphis is in the housing projects. We needed to start a community meeting, and we couldn't get the meeting to happen because there was a lot of other stuff going on around the meeting that we needed to not happen. We couldn't get the stuff to stop, so we reached out to the pastor, and he said, I can make it stop. I said, how you gonna make it stop? How you gonna make it stop? He said, watch this. He went outside and said, hey, everybody, I need you to shut down because I'm about to have church service. So everything stopped for about an hour and a half. That's the power in the pews, man. So I said, hey, could you do that one more day a week, and maybe we could get one of these fellowships in, like AA, NA, Celebrate Recovery, to come in, and you could have a meeting and you do that same thing? He said, absolutely. So now they have a Friday night meeting in that area, and he goes out and tells everybody to stop so people can come in on a Friday night after they get their paycheck, because that's a high time for drug use, right after the paycheck on a Friday. That's a great opportunity to understand how these things work. So real quick, all those things cause trauma. I do the 3 E's of a trauma: event, experience, effect. I'll give you an example. Ed's my buddy, Greg's my buddy. I'm gonna do a quick trauma thing. Y'all gotta laugh at me. I got about 15 minutes left. Okay. Well, good, I'm gonna do my trauma exercise. All right, y'all gotta laugh with me. So I don't know what Ed listens to, so I'm gonna make up some stuff right now. It's not a lie, it's just a fun fabrication. All right? So me and Pastor Ed were outside today. I'm gonna go through a trauma exercise with you. Me and Pastor Ed were outside today, and we were talking about the meeting, and we were fired up, and he was telling me about some new books that he bought. I was like, man, I can't wait. And all of a sudden, I hear a truck coming down through here playing a Morgan Wallen CD. Morgan Wallen is from the South. I don't know if y'all know who he is or not. He is this real country singing guy. So I hear a Morgan Wallen CD coming, and I hear this guy, and he's like, hey, guys, and it's a big old truck, and he almost hits both of us. It's Pastor Greg. So I fall over in the bushes, terrified. Ed doesn't. Ed waves at him. It's like, my buddy Greg. Oh, my gosh. What up, Greg? Love your truck. What music are you listening to? I'm not sure if that's for a pastor. So hey, this just happened. So what happened was the event was Greg almost hit me with the truck. Here's what happened. Me and Pastor Ed experienced it different. Pastor Ed grew up on a farm with big trucks. He's raced cars. I don't know. I'm making it up. He's done all these things where fast vehicles and big trucks don't bother him. I'm not. I'm a city slicker, and I ain't never been around nothing, and I drive a Segway everywhere.
Segway.
I can't spell that. So the event was the truck. The experience was different because I'd never been around anything like that. Pastor Ed ran over there and wanted to see what kind of wheels he's got. I'm running from his wheels. So what happens is the effect. That night I'm laying in the bed and I'm like, I can't go to sleep. I was like, man, he almost hit me today. I'm like, I can't focus. Pastor Ed just watched Netflix and fell out. He's excited about tomorrow's next day of the conference. The next day I haven't slept. Maybe I haven't eaten because I didn't realize that I was traumatized from an experience. So my whole point with that is that's how trauma works. Just because it didn't happen to you doesn't mean that it didn't happen to me. And we're all the sum of our own personal experiences, and your body always keeps the score. Your body keeps the score. So that's in the simplest forms. That's why I said you don't have to have a high level advanced degree to understand how to use trauma conversations to help people recover. Understand the process. It's an individual's experience of the event, not necessarily the event itself. Did you know that trauma, around 65% of substance abuse treatment clients report experiencing childhood abuse? Trauma. Around 75% of women in substance abuse treatment report a history of trauma. Around 92% of homeless mothers have severe trauma histories. Trauma is a gateway to a lot of the things that we fight. 71% of children are exposed to violence each year. 3 million are maltreated or neglected each year. Between 3.5 and 10 million children witness violence against their mothers each year. And 1 in 4 girls and 1 in 6 boys are sexually abused before childhood. Are you guys familiar with the foster care system and kids who age out of foster care? So there's an awful correlation. I'm going to say it's exciting because we understand it now that when children age out of the foster system, if they're not given proper resources, they either have a high chance of ending up incarcerated and or homeless in a matter of a sequence of years. And then we have these things on top of that. This is not new information. We just know how to ask it now. These are questions we should have asked a long time ago, but maybe people like you weren't behind the pen and pad, and maybe good people, well-intended people thought if I don't ask it, maybe they won't say it. That doesn't mean that it didn't happen. It means it wasn't addressed. I know this is not a mental health conference, but I want to say this real quick because I'm a mental health advocate. I'm a mental health coach. I just want to say this really quick. Mental health is a faith community concern. The faith community has got to be all hands on deck with mental health. You do not have to be a therapist. You don't even have to believe in a therapist. You can still love somebody and talk to them about how they feel. Feelings and emotions. 1 in 5 adults in the U.S. live with mental illness. Millions of people are diagnosed with mental illness, and they also have substance use disorder. They have co-occurring. The faith community has to be part of the conversation. Do you know why a lot of people don't come to faith communities, though, to talk about mental health? Confidentiality and gossip. Girl, you know what Brenda said? I think she's crazy. Y'all know that happens. Water cooler talk in the workplace is worse in the church than it is in any other community. But things like that could be refocused and recentered. Was Brenda talked to me today. Brenda, we got a counselor at the church that you can talk to. I just changed that whole thing right there. Brenda was the center. We centered her to resources instead of talked about her. But that's why some people don't reach out to our faith communities, because sometimes our faith communities, listen, it's all good. You don't have to agree with that. But when people come to you and ask you for help, it's pretty cool if you know where the resource is. You don't have to be the resource. You just need to know where one is if you're going to be working in the space. Fair enough? It's not their problem. It's our problem. We did enough of their problem that it became our problem. It was always our problem. Not choosing to address something doesn't mean that it didn't happen. Also, secular resources, congregational communities, faith-based folks, please use secular resources to help your people. That's not a compromise to your faith to use another resource for folks. Use what resources you can to save people. I would rather my son or my daughter be alive, so then we can do the other stuff. I often, in my journey, ran into people in some of our congregational spaces that were really against naloxone. And that's still an uncomfortable conversation. But I had an event that we did in a very rural area where the pastors didn't really agree with they thought that naloxone was one drug for another drug. I was like, okay, whatever Facebook group you've been on, that's what your aim is not at me. You've been in the comment sections again. Shame on you. But what happened was this lady came to represent her church, and she sent me an email a month later and said, thank you for doing the training. The naloxone kit you gave me helped me save my daughter. She came because her pastor wouldn't come to the meeting because he was busy. Respectfully, bivocational, trivocational clergy, I get it. You got other stuff to do. She came, took the kit, came home, found her daughter asleep. She learned how to use the naloxone kit, brought her daughter back to life, called 911. Now the mother and daughter are both peer advocates in my state. Nice. But it happened because we got out of the uncomfortable zone and had the uncomfortable conversations about the resources, and the resources weren't from the church, but the church used them to save somebody that's from the church. Hey, it's a cool conversation. I almost come to tears every time I talk about it because I know them personally. I didn't even remember her being at the training, but you better believe when she shot me that email, I jumped in my truck, Greg, and went to see her. I do have a truck. So one thing that the faith community is really good at is helping people frame how they interpret stuff. So we can't change genetics and brain function. I mean, that's part of biology. We can do a little bit about culture, family, long-term and immediate stuff, but I talked about that a minute ago in the social determinants. There's some stuff we can't even do anything about culturally because we can love someone and they still have to go home to the people that they're arguing with. However, clergy, people of faith, we can help people interpret self-esteem and self-efficacy different. I am and I can. They may be stuck in a situation, but they don't have to always be there. That's where we come in. And I stole this phrase from my friend Tim Robinson. I think our job is to love people back to life. Love people in addiction back to life. Think of it as CPR. Give people a chance to tell their story. I don't know about y'all, but I grew up in the church. I love testimony service. It's just like small groups. I gravitated. I love my pastor, but he was my uncle. I was terrified of him. I thought every Sunday he was preaching at me or to me or about me. We didn't even have email then. I was like, Mama, how did you tell him? Did you send a carrier pigeon? But give a person a chance to tell their story, to raise a family, to be, to belong, and to become something great. I don't know what I'm saying right there either. We all have a powerful testimony. So here's my story. My name is Monty Burks. I'm a person that's in long-term recovery. The picture is my mom in the middle. The picture to the right are some ladies I work with. We traveled to the United States Supreme Court because one of my friends who's a judge, he won an award for judicial excellence, and he invited me, a recovery person, to the United States Supreme Court. I got to tell y'all something funny. They did a background check on me, and I was like, ooh-wee. I was like, oh. I pulled up at the Supreme Court. I'm like, y'all sure? We good? We good, bro? All right, we good. But I've been to the White House on multiple occasions, but that was like early in my journey. And I also work with the African-American NAACP. I work with a lot of different groups, but I think it's important because in the African-American community, the conversations around mental health are completely different than they are with other churches. And they invited me and my team in to talk about mental health in the African-American church. And that's a big thing. That's my friend Nathan. He is one of my coordinators, one of the people that I talked about that's in long-term recovery. Criminal justice intervention confronted the person I'd become. I was formerly incarcerated on multiple occasions when I was young. And finally, I got a good smack across the wrist. Whew, I'll tell you all about it sometime. Incarceration protected me from myself. Treatment reintroduced me to myself. And recovery helped me reinvent myself. And all of this was because people of faith walked right beside me on that journey. My last fight that I took, I wore a shirt that said, I'm a person in recovery. And people was like, in recovery from what? What exactly does that mean? So I told them, and they were like, why would you tell somebody that? Why would you tell somebody that? I said, because of how you just responded. That's exactly why I told somebody. This is just some of the pictures of me and through I've done a lot of martial arts stuff. So please don't judge me, but if you do, I had fun. When I hit rock bottom, two ladies from a local church introduced me to a recovery meeting in the back of a church. The recovery meeting in the back of the church was what I needed when I went to court, because when I went to court, I realized that there was a recovery community. The meeting didn't get me out of trouble. The meeting helped me understand that the trouble I was in was a time for me to try to get some healing. The judge gave me an opportunity to go to treatment while I was incarcerated. I don't think I would have ever went to treatment if I had never went to a 12-step meeting and sat into a group of people and realized that I was not alone. Post-incarceration, I went back to the same meeting, volunteered at the church. Those same little ladies walked me to my college that I used to go to and helped me re-enroll. I got a master's degree and got a PhD. My work, all of my studies were surrounded to do the work that I do right now. I got a call from President Trump once. He actually called me and asked me to come and speak. I was like, man, is this for real? I thought it was a joke. I thought Ashton Kutcher was going to jump out of the bushes and punch me, to choke me or something. I left the barbershop. I got a call from the White House, and they asked me, said, would you come and speak at an addiction summit? You want to open up for the president? And I was like, sure. Y'all know I've been in jail, right? Just throw it out there. Got locked up a couple times, once, twice, when I was young. So I got that opportunity. I sit in the Rose Garden a few months later with Vice President Mike Pence. And I sipped tea and drank coffee with him and religious and faith leaders from all over the world at the National Day of Prayer. Again, I'm a person that's in long-term recovery. All of these pictures represent different parts of my life and people that I've worked with, the Native American Christian community, the biker community. We have biker churches and cowboy churches in Tennessee. I know you have those across the country. We have cowboy churches of big dudes with big hats that ride horses and have AA meetings out in the middle of nowhere. They are so cool and scary at the same time. And this is a part of my team. These guys were all people that are, I'm a jiu-jitsu black, but I don't know if you're familiar with jiu-jitsu, but jiu-jitsu is one of the hardest martial arts to earn a black belt in. It takes the longest time. And that was one of my most coveted prizes that I earned. And those guys right there walked with me on my journey. I've been friends with those guys for years. We all travel and train together. We've competed all across the world against other people. I still compete. I still train. So if I limp in, when you see me one day I'm limping, that's what happened. It was because of jiu-jitsu. So these are my last slides, and I'll be real quick so I can answer some questions. I want to leave you a conversation or an acronym. You brought it up earlier, man. You said hope. You said hope. Hope is the main thing. So all the other major world religions have different definitions of hope. But it all centers around the same thing. It all comes from the same thing, a feeling of expectation and desire for certain things to happen. In the Bible, it's the confident expectation of what God has. In other religious texts, the element that energizes our life, that propels us, and the one thing stronger than fear. Hope can mean a lot of things. Loving environment, a hug, a safe space, a place to cry, a place to be yourself. For me, it's the plans that God has for me and the places that He's going to help me land. And also the people that I have an opportunity to engage with. So H, healing. This is my acronym for hope, healing. My healing ain't got to happen like y'all's. It didn't, and it won't, and it's not supposed to. We heal different ways. The cool thing about that is us healing 2 different ways means we can reach 4 other people. O, order. 12 steps, 12 times, 1 day at a time. When I get that thing right, I'll start back over. You know you've read a book before. And then when you experience the book and experience an internal change, that book means something different the second time you run through it. I remember admitting I was powerless. The second time I admitted I was powerless, I really understood the whole concept of something greater than myself. P, purpose, create impact and meaning. Purpose is not about us. It's about the people we serve. If you put purpose about you, that's not purpose. That's a great thing for you, but purpose is about the people we serve. And E is excitement. Go ahead and figure out which one you want to be. I'm the dog right now with the flipped ear. But I'm excited. For me, the word clean. I'm very careful with the word clean. But for me, because of all the dirt I've been through, I say that I'm excited to be clean. I'm excited to be out of darkness. And I'm excited to be alive. And I'm excited to serve. We're all part of a recovery community. Our role is to be trauma-informed, equipped, love people, give people hugs, tell people that it's okay to not be okay. Prevention, treatment, recovery, and criminal justice. That was my team. Every single person in that picture is in long-term recovery. That's not even everybody. 3 of them went to the bathroom and missed the photo op. But that covers 95 counties in Tennessee. They all look like the areas that they're from. They're all culturally competent to their communities. The reason that they're so effective is because they ain't perfect and they don't try to be. None of us are perfect. If somebody tells you they got a perfect plan for you, you need to question that and go somewhere else.
Yeah.
Respectfully. Faith communities are all hope dealers. So I've got time for a couple of questions. I apologize for going a couple of minutes over, but I got y'all now, so let's do it.
Let's do it.
Let's do it. Anybody have any questions for me? She's going to get me with a good
She's afraid you're going to bust some jujitsu.
No, she would win.
Well, no, actually, I'm curious what got, I'm a lifer with Tai Chi, and so as a martial arts.
Yes,
And
ma'am.
I'm curious what it meant to you.
New
Or
playground.
with your jiu-jitsu.
Absolutely. So part of my recovery journey, I'm a combat sports person. I grew up in a gym, and it was me connecting with another activity that wasn't not healthy. It was a healthy activity. Even though some people saying punching your friends is not healthy, I disagree. Because me as a young, vibrant man full of energy, it gave me an opportunity to exude my energy in a way that I could go home, be healthy, sleep, rest, and get up and have another day. I was a radical in my addiction years, so I wanted to be a radical in my recovery. So I had to find all the things I needed to support me on that ride. So one of those things was going to the gym, and I actually practiced Tai Chi as well. I just started recently yoga. Some of you may want to call it stretching. I don't know how your faith wants you to interpret that. Look, this depends on your church. I'm all good with it. Do your thing. However, I go to hot yoga 3 to 5 times a week, and I go to jujitsu, and I go to hot yoga with most of the people from my church. Yoga is the most intimidating thing in the world. I don't not know how people do that, and they look at me and laugh when I fall. I will fall. Has anybody done yoga before? So y'all get it then. So I'm not by myself. Yes, ma'am.
Did you have a question? Okay.
Anybody else have any questions?
I have one.
Yes.
Since I got the microphone, I don't have to run far. What was Donald Trump like?
All right. Okay.
I mean,
so listen, y'all,
thinking
we
it.
are not getting into politics. I'm going to talk about people. All right.
No,
We good?
That's
We good?
That's what I meant. I don't.
Yeah. No. I know.
politics.
I just want to make sure everybody else we was good. So I'll tell you, it's the funny thing is people are very different on TV than they are in person. And to be a person that's been formerly incarcerated through a treatment program in recovery, being invited by a United States president, first of all, that was the coolest thing in the world. Second, he's actually really nice. We talked, it was me and a group of other people, and he recognized all of us by our name. When we came in, he's like, "Hey, Monty, how are you doing?" Fist bump. I was like, "Man, it's the president." Wow. And so he was a very nice guy, very articulate. So during the opioid epidemic, he, as his role as commander-in-chief, he opened the door to a lot of different funding resources that help support people in recovery. Yeah. And that was really what we talked about. And then we were invited to a couple of other work groups in DC to really talk about rural. I'm from rural America. I grew up in rural space. And the biggest part of my work has been working with rural communities to combat issues that plague rural communities. And that was part of it. Yes, he was cool, man. He really was. I've met 5 presidents. 5. 3 while they were in office, and 2 that were former presidents. I met Jimmy Carter.
Nice.
I met him when he was 96, 95. The year he came to the ARC Summit, Greg? 95. Yeah, he's 95 years old. He was 95 years old. I met President Bush while he was in office. I met President Clinton at a conference. I met President Obama at the White House, and then I met President Trump at the White House and in a conference. I was like, man, God has got these cool things he has let me do in my recovery journey. I was like, I'm not running for anything. I'm running from that. So, yeah, fair. Thank you for asking that. Yeah. Yes, sir.
I'm from the South too. So,
yes, sir. Get her done.
What are the biggest challenges that you're seeing in rural space in Tennessee, and what are the ways that you're hopeful that faith communities can help be a part of the solution in rural space? Man,
you just asked the best question in the world. Everything. So when you talk about community dynamics, the congregation, I'm gonna make a statement, then I'm gonna answer that. Congregations, communities of faith, churches are older than any other institution that you work in. You heard what I just said. Congregations were here before your job. They're going to be here after your job. One of the things our communities of faith have to do is get involved in workforce development and education. I think that one of the things that has plagued rural communities across the country is literacy rates. People that don't have a functional literacy rate are not going to access resources the same, which means they're not going to get jobs that pay wages. Poverty breeds all the other things that destroy communities. So when you have automobile makers and manufacturers that come into a community and they don't have a workforce that can operate the machines, they're not going to bring that to a rural space to provide something that could do economic change and economic boost. So how does the church come in? GED prep. Working with colleges to get people in their pews into school. You don't have to be 18 to start school. You can be 60. You can be 50 and get an HVAC certification or a plumbing certification. I think that clergy's role should figure out what resources can benefit their communities and look at it from an economic standpoint. And how can we rebuild our communities? Put people to work. Straight up, man, put people in the workforce. Second, I think that our congregations can be better about how they address people that are broken. One of the things that has plagued our churches is we have a way we look at people during their brokenness. We're going to pray for Sister Virginia right now because she's a drug addict. You think she's coming back? She might accept your prayer and have a Holy Ghost filled moment. And she's going to go outside and be like, believe what they just did to me in there. I am not coming back. So understanding a trauma-informed approach to ministry might make it easier for people that need help to find a better space to do that. Man, thank you for asking that question, man. I think that if our congregational community, our faith community really got involved with workforce stuff, I think that the employment rates in the country would change. I also think that we could rebuild communities like that. Absolutely. Did you know that a person will go to clergy before they go to a doctor, before they go to a teacher? So clergy folks, take advantage of that. Well, great that you came in. You been working on your GED, Brother Sam? That's simple, right? Have you had your blood pressure checked today? Do you have insulin? There's radical benevolence can happen in our faith communities if we give it an opportunity to happen. And radical benevolence isn't always money. It's information. Information is technology. Did y'all know that the brick is technology? The brick is a piece of technology. It also has many different uses. It can build a house, bust a window, or bust a head. When you put it in the hand of a person that understands how to use it, they can build a foundation for a huge building. But if you give it to a person that's no information, they might use it as a weapon. We have an opportunity to give them the right information to use the tool the right way. So I think that's what the majority of America is rural. So rural communities, if you got access to it, get it done. If you're in the city, go to the rural communities and give them resources. That's where you all come from anyway. We all come from rural communities, whether you want to admit that or not. Yes, ma'am.
You mentioned having a list of resources,
Yes, ma'am.
which is really important because I can understand where my skills end and other skills are needed. And that I have struggled with. Where do people start when they want to build a list of resources?
That's a great question. So the team that I built, that I just showed a few minutes ago, we had to build a strategic list for communities of faith, trainings that could open doors. So we started to do listening sessions, needs assessments on what communities needed, and that helped us actually build a toolkit of trainings that were evidence-based. We're familiar with the evidence-based concept, evaluated. I love practice-based trainings, but evidence-based trainings are cool because there's data behind how they work. So how do you start? Look at the area that you're going to, and then figure out how to match the training to the area's need. So if you're going to go to an area that has an low median household income, maybe the education you have should be focused around what can affect income rates. If you're going to an area that has a high population of gun violence or a high number of overdoses from what? I think the evidence says that you should make the education match the initiative or the issue you're trying to address. I think that what we've done in our country is we've told people that you need all these degrees and they don't match the work that the people are actually blessed to do. So you have a PhD in basket weaving and you work in the addiction field. I mean, it's cool, you can weave a basket, but what about the work that you got this passion for? So early on, aim the education to support the initiative. And then second is your heart. Part of our journey as people of resource, I call it people of resource. As people of resources, we want to do everything, but we can't. So find that one thing that you can do really good and then build your education up around that one thing and become the best at that. I have an initiative that I work with all retired military men. So they're all really good with power tools. So they come to the reentry programs that I work with and they teach the guys that have been formerly incarcerated how to use power tools. You would think that that's something that everybody knows how to do. They don't. But they took that skill set, went through a college of applied technology and learned how to use upgraded tools that use computer. And there's a word for it that I can't spell it or pronounce it. But they took and got another education that taught them how to better deliver that service to people that have been through a system. The product of that is we have hundreds of men that are going to work that now know how to use tools, upgraded tools. This is something that I couldn't do because I didn't have that skill set. I wasn't blessed with my hands like that. So I hope that answers your question right. Now, secondly, if you go to tn.gov, this is just me. I'm telling about what we did in my state. I know you do stuff here. I'll share what we did. If you go to tennessee.gov and put a /behavioral health, we have a full education packet with free trainings on the website that we put out for all people of faith that are interested in ministry work. The trainings are free. It's free for anybody. The reason we did that is because we traveled across our state for years and people of faith were being charged to do trainings that people shouldn't have charged them for. Now, there are some things that, some other courses and things, that's okay, but minimal stuff to help them improve lifestyle and health in their communities, they shouldn't be charged for that. You have a congregation with people that are 65 and 70 years old that really just want to give back to the community and you just charge them $800 to do a training they could have got for free. I don't think that that's anything about faith at all. I'm sorry, I'll get in my feelings about that. I love my church, folks. I love grandmothers and I'm also afraid of them. Yeah. Grandma's purses have weapons in them, guys. They can pull something out of there. Look at the grandmothers looking at me like, you know it. Anybody else have any questions for me? I'll answer whatever I can.
What was that website you just said?
tn.gov /behavioral health, or you can just Google my name, Google Monty Burks mental health, and it'll take you to the website. You're welcome. If you see me punching somebody when you Google my name, it's my old life. I'm in a new way. I'm doing better right now. And the Lord has blessed me to walk past that valley. And I'm in the good stage right now.
Any other questions?
May I end with a comment? Nobody has any other questions? The work that you do is important. And the trainings that you do are important. Remember that when you get fatigued, that might just be a sign that it's time for you to use somebody else to help you do bigger things. When we get compassion fatigue or burnout, it's about us. So it's an opportunity for us to have other partners that can help us love other people. Because when the person comes to you, if you're not your healthiest self, you might not give them the healthy self they need. Hurt people, broken people, break people. That's why we have to partner with other people. I appreciate you all. Thank you.